Now, let's take a deep look at what the first look is really telling us, because there are a lot of hidden details that most people completely missed. From the very beginning, it's clear that Dutton Ranch is not just a fresh start for Beth and Rip. In fact, it feels more like a test. A very brutal one. Moving to Texas might seem like a smart move after everything that happened in Montana, but the truth is, this new land comes with its own rules, its own power struggles, and its own dangerous players. Beth and Rip are stepping into a place where they are no longer the biggest force, and that changes everything. In Yellowstone, they always had control, connections, and fear on their side. But here, they are outsiders. And when you are an outsider in a land controlled by powerful ranchers, you are automatically a target. This is exactly why the tone of the series already feels darker and more intense. It's not just about protecting land anymore. It's about survival. Now, let's talk about Rip for a moment, because his role is going to be more important than ever. We all know Rip as someone who follows orders, someone who executes plans without hesitation. But now, things are different. For the first time, Rip is the one in charge. He is the leader. And that comes with pressure he has never faced before. Every decision he makes will directly affect their future. And based on what we've seen so far, it won't be easy at all. At the same time, Beth is still Beth. Sharp, fearless, and always 10 steps ahead. Or at least, that's what she believes. But here's where things get interesting. The first look strongly hints that Beth may finally meet someone who can challenge her intelligence. Someone who is just as strategic, just as ruthless, and maybe even more patient than her. And if that's true, then for the first time, Beth might actually lose control of a situation. Another important detail is Carter. We can clearly see that his journey is going to take a serious turn. He is no longer just a kid learning the basics. Now, he is being shaped into something much bigger. Rip is pushing him harder, expecting more from him, and preparing him for responsibilities that could define his future. But here's the question: what happens when that pressure becomes too much? Because not everyone can handle becoming like Rip. And while all of this is happening, we also cannot ignore the shadow of the past. Just because Beth and Rip moved to Texas doesn't mean their past stayed behind. What happened before? Especially the things they did. Those consequences are still out there. And the first look gives us small hints that those past actions might slowly start catching up to them. So when you really think about it, Episode 1 is not just about a new beginning. It's about entering a world where every move matters. Every enemy is dangerous, and every mistake could cost them everything. And this is exactly why the story already feels so intense, even before it truly begins. And this is just the start. Because in the next section, things get even more interesting when we break down the new enemies waiting for them in Texas. And trust me, these are not the kind of rivals you can easily defeat. Now, let's talk about the most dangerous part of this new story. The enemies. Because if you thought Beth and Rip have already faced the worst kind of rivals before, then you might want to think again. The first look clearly suggests that Texas is on a completely different level. And the people controlling this land are not just powerful. They are unpredictable. The biggest name we need to focus on here is Bula Jackson. From the very first hints, it's obvious that she is not just another ranch owner. She is someone who has built her power with intelligence, patience, and strategy. And what makes her even more dangerous is the fact that she doesn't need to act loudly like other villains. People like Bula don't show their strength immediately. They wait, they observe, and then they strike when the time is perfect. And this is exactly why her dynamic with Beth is going to be one of the most exciting parts of the series. Because for the first time, Beth is not facing someone she can easily manipulate or outsmart. Bula seems like the kind of person who already understands how Beth thinks. And if that's true, then every conversation between them will feel like a battle, even if no weapons are involved. It won't just be about power. It will be about who makes the smarter move first. But Bula is not the only threat waiting in Texas. Another very interesting character we need to pay attention to is Rob Will. Now, this is where things start to feel even more intense. Rob is not just a businessman or a comm strategist. He feels more like a direct reflection of Rip. Strong, aggressive, and completely unpredictable. And when you put two people like Rip and Rob in the same space, conflict is not just possible. It's guaranteed. What makes Rob even more dangerous is that he doesn't seem like someone who follows rules. And in a world where power is already unstable, someone like that can create chaos very quickly. I am sure that at some point, we are going to see a direct clash between Rip and Rob. And when that happens, it won't be a small fight. It will be something that changes the direction of the story. And then comes another name that might actually be the most dangerous of them all. Haqin. Now this character is very interesting because he doesn't look like a typical villain at first. He is described as someone who fixes problems. But when you really think about it, that phrase can mean something much darker. Fixing problems in this world doesn't always mean solving them peacefully. Sometimes, it means removing them completely. And this is where things get scary. Because if Haqin is someone who handles problems in extreme ways, then he might be the kind of character who operates in the shadows. The kind of person you don't see coming until it's too late. And if he is connected to Bula, which seems very likely, then that makes her even more powerful than we initially thought. Because having someone like Haqin on your side means you don't just control the land. You control what happens behind the scenes as well. So when we look at all these characters together, it becomes very clear that Beth and Rip are not just dealing with one enemy. They are surrounded by different types of threats. A mastermind like Bula, a force like Rob, and a shadow figure like Haqin. And the most dangerous part is they might not even realize how serious the situation is at the beginning. This is exactly why Episode 1 feels like the calm before the storm. Everything might seem under control at first, but slowly, these rivalries will start building up. And once they explode, there will be no turning back. And just when you think things couldn't get more intense, the next section reveals something completely different. Because it's not just about enemies and power. There are also personal stories, emotions, and relationships that could change everything from the inside. Now, let's shift our focus a little. Because Dutton Ranch is not just about power, enemies, and survival. It's also about personal journeys. And in my opinion, these personal stories might be the ones that truly shape the future of everything we're about to see. Because sometimes, the biggest problems don't come from enemies. They come from within. The first character we really need to talk about here is Carter. Because his story is quietly becoming one of the most important parts of the series. In Yellowstone, we saw him as a kid trying to find his place, trying to understand what it means to be part of something bigger. But now, things are very different. At Dutton Ranch, Carter is no longer just learning. He is being prepared. Rip is clearly pushing him harder than before, teaching him not just how to work on a ranch, but how to think, how to react, and how to survive in a world that doesn't forgive mistakes. And this is where things get interesting. Because becoming like Rip is not easy. It requires discipline, toughness, and sometimes losing a part of yourself. So the real question is, can Carter handle that transformation? Or will we see him struggle with the weight of expectations? Because, from what we can understand so far, Carter is stepping into a role that could eventually make him the future of the ranch. And that kind of responsibility can change a person in ways we don't expect now. At the same time, there's another side of Carter's story that adds a completely different layer to everything. And that is his possible romance with Oriana. This is where the tone of the series slightly softens, but also becomes more emotional. Oriana is described as someone with a wild and free spirit. And that already tells us that she is very different from the strict and controlled environment Carter is being raised in, and when you bring these two together, it creates a very interesting contrast. On one side, you have Carter, who is being shaped into a disciplined ranchman, and on the other side, you have Oriana, who represents freedom, emotion, and a different way of living. And this is exactly why their connection could become something very powerful. But here's where the tension begins. Because Carter doesn't really have the freedom to just live his life the way he wants. He is under Rip's guidance, under Beth's expectations, and part of a system that demands loyalty above everything else. So if this relationship grows, it won't be simple. In fact, it might have to stay hidden, and just imagine what that could lead to. Secret meetings, difficult choices, and moments where Carter has to decide between his responsibilities and his feelings. And in a world like this, those kinds of decisions never end well. Because, sooner or later, everything comes to the surface. Now, let's not forget another important character who could bring a completely different energy to the story, Zachariah, a man trying to rebuild his life after being released from jail. And honestly, characters like this are always very interesting, because they usually carry a past that can either destroy them or push them to become something better. If Rip is the one giving him a second chance, then that already tells us a lot. Because Rip doesn't trust easily. So if he sees something in Zachariah, then there must be a reason. Maybe he sees loyalty. Maybe he sees strength. Or maybe he sees a version of himself. And this is why Zachariah could become one of the most loyal people on the ranch. The kind of person who is willing to do anything to prove that he deserves a second chance. But at the same time, we also have to ask, what if his past comes back? What if the life he is trying to leave behind refuses to let him go? Because in this universe, the past always finds a way. So when you look at all these personal stories together, it becomes clear that Dutton Ranch is not just building a story about land and power. It's building a story about people. People who are changing, growing, struggling, and making choices that could define everything. And this is exactly what makes the series even more intense. Because, while the external threats are getting stronger, the internal conflicts are growing at the same time. And in the next section, things take another turn. Because we're about to talk about someone who might bring balance to all this chaos. Or maybe become a key player in ways we don't expect. Now, let's talk about a character who might completely change the tone of the story. Everett McKee. Because while Dutton Ranch is clearly building a world full of conflict, rivalry, and rising tension, every story like this needs someone who stands in the middle of it all. Someone who understands both sides. And from everything we know so far, Everett feels exactly like that kind of person. He is described as a weathered veteran and a veterinarian. Someone who treats animals with care, patience, and understanding. And honestly, that already tells us a lot about his personality. In a world where most people solve problems with power or violence, Everett represents something very different. He represents calmness, wisdom, and most importantly, perspective. But here's what makes him really interesting. Characters like Everett are never just simple background figures. They usually see things others don't. They understand people in ways others can't, and that means he could become a very important connection between different sides of the story. Now think about this for a moment. We have Beth, who is always ready to fight. We have Bula, who is always calculating her next move. And then we have Everett, someone who might try to keep things from completely falling apart. And this creates a very unique dynamic. Because while others are pushing toward conflict, Everett might be the one trying to slow everything down. But the real question is, how long can someone like him actually keep peace in a place like this? Because let's be honest, Dutton Ranch is not a world where problems are solved with simple conversations. Tensions are already building. Rivalries are already forming. And at some point, things will go too far. So even if Everett tries to act as a bridge between characters, there will come a moment where even he cannot stop what's coming. And that's where his role becomes even more important. Because sometimes, the person who tries to keep peace ends up being the one who understands the consequences the most. He might not be the one creating conflict, but he could be the one who sees how dangerous everything is becoming before anyone else does. Another interesting detail is how he might connect with Rip and Beth. With Rip, there could be a level of mutual respect. Both are experienced. Both have seen tough situations, but they deal with them in very different ways. Rip acts, Everett thinks. And that difference alone could lead to some very meaningful moments between them. With Beth, things could be even more interesting. Because Beth is not someone who easily listens to others. She trusts her instincts, her intelligence, and her ability to control situations. But Everett might be one of the few people who can actually challenge her without creating direct conflict. Not through power, but through understanding. And if that happens, we might see a side of Beth that we don't usually see. A moment where she actually pauses. A moment where she listens. And in a story like this, even a small shift like that can mean something big. Now, beyond his personality, Everett also plays another important role. He connects us to the everyday life of the ranch. While others are focused on power and control, he is focused on care, on keeping things running, on maintaining balance. And that's something this story really needs. Because without that balance, everything would just turn into chaos too quickly. But again, balance never lasts forever in a world like this. Because while Everett might try to hold things together, the truth is, the storm is already forming. The enemies are already in place. The tensions are already rising. And sooner or later, even the calmest voice won't be able to stop what's coming. And this brings us to the final and most important part. Because everything we've talked about so far leads to one big question. How will all of this begin in episode 1? And what secrets is the first look really hiding from us? Now, let's finally bring everything together and talk about what episode 1 is really setting up. Because, when you look closely, the first look is not just showing us a beginning. It's quietly revealing the foundation of a much bigger story. Full of secrets that are still hidden beneath the surface. From the very start, it feels like Beth and Rip believe they are in control of their new life. A new ranch, a new environment, and a chance to build something on their own terms. But the reality is very different. Because while they are focused on settling in and establishing their presence, everything around them is already moving. Power structures are already in place. Alliances already exist. And most importantly, they are already being watched. This is one of the biggest hidden details in the first look. It's not just about what Beth and Rip are doing. It's about who is paying attention to them. And when powerful people start watching you, it usually means one thing: you are either a threat or an opportunity. And in this case, they might be both at the same time. Episode 1 seems to be building tension very slowly. Nothing explodes immediately. There are no instant confrontations. But that's exactly what makes it more intense. Because you can feel that something is coming. Every interaction, every new character, every small moment feels like a piece of a larger puzzle. Now, let's talk about one very important prediction. I believe episode 1 will not show us the full strength of the enemies yet. Instead, it will introduce them in a controlled way. Calm, confident, and almost friendly on the surface. But underneath that calmness, there will be clear signs of danger. And this is exactly how powerful characters operate. They don't rush. They let others make the first move. And this could be where Beth makes her first mistake. Because Beth is used to reading people quickly and reacting fast. But in a place like this, reacting too quickly can be dangerous. If she underestimates someone like Bula, even for a moment, it could create a chain reaction that she cannot control later. And once that happens, things will escalate very quickly. Another key detail is Rip's leadership. Episode 1 will likely test him in small but meaningful ways. Decisions that may not seem huge at first, but will have long-term consequences. And the interesting part is, Rip is not someone who hesitates. He trusts his instincts. But what if his instincts don't match the reality of Texas? Because this is not Montana. And the rules are different. We also cannot ignore the possibility that something from their past might appear sooner than expected. The first look gives subtle hints that their previous actions are not completely buried. And if even a small part of that past reaches Texas, it could immediately put them in a vulnerable position. Because enemies don't just attack your present. They use your past against you. And then there's Carter. Episode 1 might quietly show us the beginning of his transformation. Small moments where he is forced to act differently, think differently, and slowly step into a role he may not be fully ready for. And at the same time, his connection with Oriana could begin in a subtle way. A simple interaction, but one that could grow into something much bigger as the story continues. So, when you really think about it, Episode 1 is not about big action or dramatic explosions. It's about setting the stage. Introducing a world where every character has a purpose, every decision has weight, and every secret is waiting to be revealed at the right time. And this is exactly why Dutton Ranch already feels so exciting. Because it's not rushing the story. It's building it carefully, step by step, tension by tension. But now I want to hear from you. What do you think is the biggest threat waiting for Beth and Rip in Texas? Do you think they will stay in control? Or are they about to face something they can't handle? Let's meet in the comments.